What are we going to do in this video, Brain? In this video, Becky, we're going to talk about the fact that I finished my PhD! I did it! Hello, my name's Rebecca and I'm a neuroscientist here to talk to you today about all things neuro and science, but I've actually not been here to talk to you about neuroscience for the past month or so, and that is because I have been handing in my PhD thesis. Also getting a haircut, but mostly the PhD thesis thing. It has been a month, and so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it's like handing in a PhD thesis, what comes next for me, how I got here in the first place, because I still can't quite believe that I did, and also whether a PhD might actually be something you'd enjoy. So, first up, what is a PhD? If you haven't watched my Week in the Life of a Neuroscientist video, which I highly recommend by the way, it's like super good, a PhD is the highest academic degree you can achieve in many countries, which means after 22 years of education, starting at the tender age of 4, I've finally done it and can go no further. PhD stands for Doctorate of Philosophy, which confuses many people because I am not a philosopher. I am a neuroscientist. And the reason that all PhDs are doctors of philosophy, regardless of the field, is likely a historical one. Philosophy originally meant love of wisdom and love of learning. So by saying you're getting a doctorate of philosophy, we're not saying that you're an expert in philosophy, but rather that you really love learning. Which makes sense because to do a PhD, you really do have to love learning about your subject. Like, quite a lot. So my PhD is a doctorate of philosophy, but not actually in philosophy, it's technically in clinical medicine. Getting a PhD isn't quite like other forms of education you might have done, with very minimal mandatory classes or lectures, and I wasn't assessed using any written exams. Instead, a PhD usually consists of generating your own original research on a topic of your choosing, and then writing that up into a thesis. Theses vary in length, but in Cambridge for my field, the maximum word limit was 60,000 words. That's 60,000 words. Most people won't hit that. For me, I did my PhD for 4 years, which is pretty standard here in the UK, though it can be longer in countries like the US. And with all of the research I did in that 4 years, my thesis was just over 30,000 words in the end, which might be a little on the shorter side, but everything I needed was in there, and I'm not going to make my poor examiners read a longer thesis for no reason. Speaking of examiners, Rebecca, didn't you just say you didn't get examined as part of your PhD? I said I don't have written exams, but the next part of completing my PhD is what we call a viva or thesis defense. Now, I like to think I'll turn up to the defense with like a sword and shield, but I've been explicitly told by my supervisor that I'm not allowed to come in any form of cosplay or LARP gear, so I guess that is what it is. Right now, I cannot technically call myself a doctor, even though my thesis is submitted. The next step is for my examiners to read the thesis and decide if it's actually any good. They will then set a date for my viva, which is a time when we will meet up and they will quiz me on the contents of the thesis to check my understanding and my general thinking around the topic. Have I done enough to be considered an expert in this subject? It is not uncommon in the UK for these vivas to last 4 to 5 hours, so I have been told that snacks are a brilliant idea. The examiners themselves are also experts in the field, so in my case I've nominated examiners that are senior academics with research interests which overlap with mine, even if they're not identical. Once the examiners have approved the thesis in the viva, traditionally this is the point when you can consider yourself done. When they've approved the thesis, no takesy-backsies. And I've heard firsthand from examiners the joy they find in welcoming a newly minted doctor into the room for the first time. But even after that point, I might still have corrections to do suggested by the examiners, and these could be anything from typos to rerunning analyses to running new analyses. Then I have to resubmit when the corrections are done, then I have to deposit it at the university library, both an electronic copy and a hardbound copy, and then I graduate. I have been asked by a lot of people when I actually celebrate finishing my PhD, and it's a valid question because, dear God, it's a long-winded process. But what I keep telling people, and as I mentioned, is that most people will do that big celebration once they finish their viva and then again once they graduate. It is also at this point that I will be changing all of my official documentation to Dr. Rebecca because I have no shame and I have spent a lot of time and energy to get these letters after my name. So that's what's been happening and what's gonna be happening over the next few months for me, but how did I even get to the point of submitting a PhD in the first place? Well, to answer that, I think we need to go back. Way back. Okay, wait, no, not that far back. To the year I started my master's degree at the University of Oxford. It was 2020, Life was not great, and I had literally just started my master's in clinical neuroscience when I had to start thinking about PhD applications. Fortunately, I'd also done my undergraduate at the University of Oxford, and so I had a supervisor that I felt comfortable going to ask where to get started. I do not come from a long line of academics. My dad is retired now but was an engineer, and my mum produces puppetry. So when I say I had no clue how to go about applying for a PhD, that is not an understatement. I literally went to my supervisor and said, how do the thing? Like, where do I even begin? And the first step in the process is something that a lot of people I've found shocked by, especially younger students. And maybe it's just not what you'd expect to do, or it's something a little bit scary. But the thing he recommended was cold emailing professors. I emailed about 30 different professors, very politely, attaching my CV and tailoring each email to their research interests, asking if they'd be interested in a PhD student. Every time I suggested writing a research proposal of what I would do in my PhD, and said I'd be happy to do that independently based on what I could find about their lab online, or that we could work on it together. Most never replied. But here's the thing, you only need one. Something that's quite funny to look back on now is one of the people who never replied is my current supervisor. Yeah, the supervisor I just finished my PhD with, he didn't actually reply to the original email. Instead, serendipity got in the way, as another very senior academic replied to my email instead, CCing in my current supervisor. This still to me feels like sheer dumb luck. There is no reason this very senior academic should have replied to my email, none at all. I must have caught him on a tea break, or in a lull, or on a good day, or on a bad day. But regardless of why it happened, it did. Like I said, you only need one. And from there, I had an interview with the two of them where we discussed science and statistics, and then when things were going pretty well, we started discussing potential research proposals of what I could do for a PhD. From there, my current supervisor suggested that I write up the research proposal into something a little more concrete, and then we could ping it back and forth between the two of us to work out the details. It was at this point, and only this point, that I started applying to PhD programs. This is worth having in mind in terms of the time scale of PhD applications. You pretty much need to have a supervisor on side before you even start applying to PhD programs, which is why I had literally just started my master's when I began reaching out. Now, I know cold emailing people is scary, but here's the thing. As with many professions, what you need to get started is a foot in the door. If you're lucky enough to already have connections in your desired field, this will give you a massive leg up here. And this is why it can be good to ask lecturers you like if you can work in their lab over summer, or help out with a project, or shadow their lab for a week even. But if you don't have any of these connections, if you don't have a foot in the door, then you're going to have to get over the social niceties and shyness and start knocking. Politely, but loudly. The hardest part is getting someone to answer the door. Once you're in, things will get easier. But make no mistake, unless you get incredibly lucky, no one is going to invite you in completely unprompted. So get ready to start fighting your corner. I had to get lucky to get here. Like I said, there was no reason that very senior academics should have replied to my email. People are busy, emails don't get read at the best of times, and especially from random students you've never met. I got lucky. But I also put myself in as many situations to get lucky as I could. It's called planned happenstance. This idea that we can't possibly control all the factors that will enable our career progression, but what you can do is put yourself in as many positive situations as you can and then hope something comes along. You just have to go for it. I should also point out that there are many other ways to get on the PhD track that I simply wasn't aware of when I started my PhD journey. So for example, another common route is becoming a research assistant first. And research assistants are salaried positions in labs. You usually need an undergraduate or a master's degree to have these positions, and they involve helping out with a whole bunch of different research. But a lot of people who are research assistants are taken on with the understanding that they likely want to do a PhD later on. The other advantage to the research assistant position is you get to feel out whether research is something you'd enjoy and whether this lab is somewhere that you enjoy before you lock into a 4-year PhD. Once I'd put in the application to the PhD programs with backing from my supervisor, I then got interviewed again by the university themselves and was then offered a PhD, which I still can't quite believe. And then I was offered funding, which I can't believe even more. By both looking back and introspecting and also shamelessly asking people how I got on the PhD, I think the answer of why I got offered my place is genuinely sheer enthusiasm for the field. I love neuroscience. I love learning about neuroscience. I love doing research into neuroscience. And this means that every time someone asks me a question about neuroscience, I just kind of go off. And that does pair pretty well with interviews. This also meant that I had thought quite a lot about the project that I wanted to do as part of my PhD and where I wanted to go with it. And this, coupled with a sheer love of statistics, which I picked up from somewhere for some reason, I think probably sealed the deal. So that's where I'm going and how I got here. And if you're still here, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you might be wondering if a PhD is something you would enjoy. So let's have a look at what a PhD actually entails on the day-to-day and what reasons you might have to do one yourself. The first year of my PhD, I spent a lot of time just reading around my subject, and I also did a little baby project, which you can read, it got published, basically just to acclimatize my very young self to how academia actually works, and this was a very valuable process for me. My initial project that I pitched in my PhD application also changed a lot over this first year as I figured out exactly what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. This is very common. Very few PhD projects go exactly as initially described. Other than that, everyone's PhDs are so incredibly different that it's actually really tricky to make other general comments about the PhD experience. For example, my PhD involved a lot of data collection, but not everyone does that. Some people use secondary data and focus on analysis, whilst other people do online data collection, which looks different again. Others do clinical trials, which is a whole other beast. So it's really difficult to make general comments about the PhD experience, other than it's stressful. Fun, but stressful. You have to love the topic, like really love the topic, but you also have to love research. It's not for everybody, and so I'd really recommend getting some experience under your belt if you can before you commit to a full PhD. Academia has some quirks, like the fact that it is incredibly flexible. I basically set my own working hours during my PhD, and while that has some obvious upsides, it also means you have to be very strict with yourself and good at managing your time effectively. It's also very independent. Though collaborations are common amongst researchers, I spent a lot of my PhD on my own with my own thoughts. So you have to be ready to keep yourself motivated with very few people looking over your shoulder to keep you on track. And that track, by the way, lasts for 4 years, and basically the only deadline on it is get PhD done, which means you have to be ready to make a lot of your own deadlines and stick to them. It also takes a lot of mental capacity. Research is a very intellectually demanding job, and you shouldn't underestimate how draining it is to spend your whole day doing tasks that are incredibly complex. There are very few to no jobs that you can just get on with in the background and do something a bit mindless to feel productive. It feels like almost everything requires your full attention and full mental resources, which can be a lot in the day-to-day. But all of those negatives are why I freaking love it. With my whole heart, I never thought I would get to do a PhD. For the vast majority of my life, I didn't even know what one was. No teacher ever suggested it to me. It just wasn't on the cards. And the fact that I get to exist in spaces like this fills me with so much excitement that it pales in comparison to the stress of the job most of the time. I love the flexibility. I love that it allows me to do videos like this or more science communication or in general tailor my job to what I want to do. I love the independence. I love that I just get left alone to do my science, and I know that won't last forever. And I love that it takes so much of my mental energy because I love the feeling of my brain buzzing when I get to learn about new theories or how to test theories or think about analyzing complex data. It's not for everybody, but I think it might be for me. The road to heading in a PhD has been rocky. When I started university all those many moons ago, I had no idea I would have ended up here. And in spite of all the stress, I really have loved it. So if you're thinking about giving this whole thing a whirl, the first thing I'd recommend is checking this wonderful world of research really is something you'd enjoy. It's a strange old place and might not be for everybody. So if you're a student, ask your lecturers for research experience, make the most of research projects you get to do as part of your course, and also just ask around for other people's opinions and advice. Don't just listen to me. There's a range of experiences out there, and you want to make sure that you collect that full range to make a truly informed choice. The truth is, I love when people ask to chat to me about stuff. It shows initiative, it shows passion, and in case you haven't noticed, I really like talking about what I do. I still have a ways to go before I can officially call myself doctor, but it's been one hell of a ride, and I hope this video has given you a little bit of insight into what it's actually like handing in a PhD thesis. If you're interested in what my thesis is actually about, keep an eye out for the next video in which I'll be going into the theory I've actually been testing for the last 4 years. But other than that, it's time for me to head back to the lab and plan what I'm going to do for the next video. So until then, please do let me know of any progress you make in trying to take over the world with science!